Good afternoon. It's Saturday, the 27th of December. I'm Erin Viner, and this is IBA News, broadcasting from Jerusalem. The United Nations Security Council will vote on the Palestinian bid for statehood by this coming Monday at the latest. That's according to senior Palestinian negotiator Saeb Erekat, who also indicated that several revisions have been made to the Jordanian drafted text, which has not yet been made public. Erekat's announcement suggests Ramallah's intentions to reject international pressure to postpone that vote until after the national elections are held in Israel on March 17th. Recent reports said that U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry had been pushing for such a delay over concerns that a UNSC decision on the matter ahead of the balloting could strengthen the Israeli right wing. The Jordanian initiative sets 2016 for recognition of a Palestinian state and an Israeli withdrawal to the 1967 lines. The proposal also calls for a 12-month deadline to finalize a peace accord between Israel and the Palestinians, with Jerusalem as a shared capital. At the same time, France, Britain, and Germany have reportedly been working on a separate text to revive the negotiation process between the two sides, but it is unclear if those efforts have yet yielded results or if the PA bid incorporates any of the elements from that draft. The corruption scandal within the Israel Beitenu party is continuing to gather momentum. It was revealed on Channel 1's Yoman news program last night that the police now suspect that officials at the Rishon LeZion municipality of having received funds for public performances by Russian artists that didn't take place, and then dividing the money between Internal Affairs Deputy Minister and Israel Beitenu Secretary General Faina Kirschenbaum and the faction's Chief of Staff, David Godofsky. Investigators don't believe that the city's mayor was involved. Kirschenbaum's daughter, Ranit, is also suspected of involvement in the case, and she's been ordered to 5 days of house arrest. Moshe Klinsky of the Basketball Federation has also been placed under house arrest on suspicion that he paid bribes to the deputy minister. The government wasn't brave enough during Operation Protective Edge, and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was a coward. This accusation from Yesh Atid leader Yair Lapid today while speaking at a Sabbath cultural event in Cologne. Lapid failed to elaborate on the statements, only saying that when he was a member of the cabinet, he was the only one who didn't leak the discussions. He added that the government should have demanded the demilitarization of Hamas and the ceasefire arrangements to end the 50-day summer conflict, and should have been part of the International Committee for the Rehabilitation of Gaza after it ended. Lapid went on to address any future peace agreement with the Palestinians, saying that an accord must be reached without dividing Jerusalem. Countries do not negotiate the status of their capital, he said to the gathering, even if it means abandoning the negotiating table. At the same event, Likud member of Knesset Dani Danon, who is running against Netanyahu in the party primary, says that the Shas, Kulanu, and Israel Beitenu factions must notify the public during the election campaign whether they intend to back a left or right-wing government following the balloting. Danon said that most of the constituents considering supporting any of these parties are from the national camp and would feel betrayed if their votes were diverted from the right side of the political spectrum to the left without their agreement. In the run-up to the March elections, political pundits are discussing all kinds of scenarios involving the mergers and divisions of various parties. Times of Israel editor David Horovitz walks IBA's Eli Wogelenter through the maze of possibilities, beginning with the Shas party split into different camps, led by Aryeh Deri and Eli Yishai.
You saw some maneuvering that apparently is not going to come to pass of part of the Jewish home under Uri Ariel breaking away and joining up with Yishai. And part of the thinking there from Yishai's point of view certainly is how can I ensure that I don't fall below the threshold? He and Deri are taking a great risk with their electorate, that's for sure. We're seeing polls now where because they've split, a question that you would never have asked of Shas. Is Shas going to clear the threshold? Of course Shas is going to clear the threshold, even if it's 3.2, even if it's 4%, if it's 5%. Well, now that they've split, that becomes an issue. And, it's got to be the case that as we get closer to the elections, parties that see themselves potentially disappearing are going to have to do some very serious thinking and may have to build alliances that they ideally would not have wanted to build.
And as we get closer to the election and different configurations, different alliances are made, we could see a situation where Kahlon and Lapid will merge into one party. Can you see that happening? And what would the effect of that be?
Well, there you've got, we've seen this, that we're assured this boost that Livni joining the Labour Party has given both of them. Here was a party with a handful of seats, joins up with Labour, and together they're polling higher than they were polling separately. You don't know if this is going to hang tough or hold true. The same potentially is applying, we are told, where Kachlon and Lapid are concerned. Right? If the two of them unify, and Lapid reportedly wants it a great deal, then they become potentially the biggest force in Israeli politics and the potential kingmakers, or maybe even the kings themselves. Right? So Lapid apparently wants it, Kachlon apparently does not. We still don't know, really, the first thing about. We don't know Kachlon's personnel. We don't really know his political orientation. We've heard, this is a former Likud minister who years ago said he opposed Palestinian statehood, and who 3 weeks ago said, well, I'm sort of center, a little to the right maybe, or words to that effect. It's all very vague, and we have this history in Israel, of course, of relative unknowns, who the more you know about them, the less support they gain. By definition, the more specific a politician's position, the more he alienates other parts of the electorate. So it's just too early to say. But the polls are telling us if Kachlon and Lapid get together, that becomes sort of the centerpiece of Israeli politics. And I will say one thing. As we were talking before, I interviewed Dov Lippman of Yesh Atid, the one American-born Knesset member, who made the argument that this is the year of, or the election of, the centrists. He thinks that lots of Israelis, most of Israelis, I think he may even have said, are somewhere in the center. I think there's some truth in that. I think there's a lot of, I think the center, I think Israelis, for example, want to separate from the Palestinians and are very wary about the Palestinians. That's a pretty consensual position, and astute politicians can capitalize on that. I think there really is potential for a strong center, but like I say, if Kachlon turns out to be less stellar than he appears when we know so little about him, all those numbers start to change. Lapid was the savior. Lapid won 19 seats from nowhere. Nobody's polling him at 19 now, but then nobody was polling him anywhere near 19 then. Again, you just come to that same conclusion. Too far until the elections to start making any predictions, really.
In the last election, 2 years ago, the main issue was not the issue that's been on the table for the last 25 years, the security issue. It was the economic issue. Will that be the center of this election campaign as we get closer to the election? What do you see happening?
I heard Kachlon just now was talking about this is again going to be an election about people who work, needing to be able to live dignified lives and buy homes and get through the month and so on. So he's talking about this in economic terms. I certainly think that's going to be in the mix. We have a society where lots of families with two breadwinners cannot get through the month, where people who should not be laboring against financial hardship are. On the other hand, we had a very bitter war against Hamas just a few months ago. We have Hezbollah in South Lebanon with 10 times the rocket power that Hamas had. We have Iran closing in on the bomb. We have the Palestinians agitating for statehood and so on. It's hard to imagine that that's not going to be in the mix. And again, if you look at Israeli history, it only takes some kind of security incident, to change the tone of an election and the...
1986.
Well, that was the most dramatic. That Rabin had been assassinated, and Peres was smoothly going to succeed him, and then there were 4 suicide bombings in 10 days in February, March, and the map was rewritten, and Netanyahu won those elections. So the potential for security issues to remake the electoral map is ever present in Israel.
In regional news, the Islamic State has been pounded by at least 39 airstrikes since Thursday, including more than a dozen near the flashpoint city of Kobani in Syria. Aerial footage has been released by the U.S. Central Command showing airstrikes on buildings controlled by ISIS forces near Aleppo, Syria. According to CENTCOM, the strikes were carried out a week ago in support of Operation Inherent Resolve, led by the United States against the radical jihadists in Syria and Iraq, where they have seized large areas of both countries in a blitzkrieg attack 3 months ago. The coalition nations involved in military strikes in Syria include Australia, Belgium, Canada, Denmark, France, Netherlands, and the United Kingdom. Those helping the U.S. to carry out the airstrikes in Syria are Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Jordan, the last of which had a plane shot down earlier this week in northeast Syria during an air raid over the province of Raqqa, and its pilot captured by ISIS forces. Despite an official request from Washington, Jerusalem has decided not to support the reconciliation between the United States and Cuba at this stage. The decision reportedly stems from the government's reluctance to antagonize opponents of the new policy at the U.S. Congress, most of whom are Republican and Israel's allies. Ambassador to the U.S. Ron Dermer is a native of Miami, Florida, that is considered to be a bastion of Cuban exiles who staunchly oppose the island nation's regime led by Raul Castro. Dermer says that Israel had always supported the American embargo policy, and while he understands the emotional impact of the Obama administration's decision to engage with Havana, Jerusalem will undertake its own careful evaluations to decide whether or not to follow suit on normalizing relations.
First of all, I was elated that Alan Gross was released. I was elated for him and for his family. As you said, we don't have diplomatic relations. Israel does not have diplomatic relations with Cuba. So we've obviously, like everyone else, seen this change of policy, and we'll be in close contact with administration officials to understand it, and I'm sure it will affect how we will assess our policy moving forward. I will tell you one other thing, Jorge. I'm an Israeli ambassador that was born and raised in Miami.
Yeah.
So
you do understand the Cuban
I understand
affairs.
the emotional impact that this has on the Cuban-American community, and I share with that community, no matter where they are on this particular issue, the hope that Cuba will become a free and democratic nation once again, and the Cuban people will have their freedom once again.
This week's renunciation of Ukraine's neutral status by the Kiev parliament in a step toward joining NATO has deepened the confrontation between Russia and the West and is sparking outrage in Moscow. A spokesman for Russia's foreign ministry slammed Kiev's NATO aspirations and declared that any expansion of the organization's influence to the east will force Moscow to respond with adequate measures. During a briefing at the ministry, Alexander Lukashevich went on to express Russia's certainty that Ukraine's European Atlantic tilt would be unlikely to help it to solve its own social and economic difficulties, but would instead ultimately lead to a serious military and political shift due to its effect on Russia's own national security interests that would inevitably impact not only Europe but the entire world. Earlier in the week, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov denounced Kiev's bid by saying that the NATO membership of such a strategic former partner of the Soviet Republic with its shared lengthy border is being seen as a direct military threat. And the Kremlin is also branding the proposed expansion of NATO as a fundamental threat to Russia in a revised military doctrine that dramatically reflects deteriorating relations with the West. Former Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev is calling for serious talks between Moscow and Washington to prevent a further escalation of tensions over the Ukraine crisis. Gorbachev, whose policy of perestroika played a major role in ending the Cold War more than 2 decades ago, made those statements during the presentation of his new book called After the Kremlin. During celebration of Hanukkah this past week, British Prime Minister David Cameron addressed a number of subjects of importance to the Jewish community during a special event that he held at his official residence on Downing Street in honor of the holiday. We're trying to bring that to you now. All right, I think we'll try to bring it to you later. Turning now to Saudi Arabia, where an anti-terrorism court is set to try 2 women on charges that they defied edicts that prohibit women from driving. 25-year-old Lujain Al-Hathioul and 33-year-old Maisa Al-Amoudi have been detained since the beginning of the month in connection with their outspoken positions against the ban expressed on Twitter and other social media sites. The specialized criminal court in Riyadh is known for trying terrorism cases and handing down long prison terms to human rights workers, peaceful dissidents, and critics of the Saudi monarchy. Now taking a look at a new book authored by a member of Israel's statehood generation, Ehud Diskin, who reached the rank of colonel after fighting in the Six-Day War, the War of Attrition, and the Yom Kippur War. Diskin recounts his tumultuous life growing up as the state of Israel was developing in the book called Yes, It's Possible, filled with captivating personal stories, funny anecdotes, and nostalgia for the little Israel of bygone days, along with the penetrating human insight of a successful international businessman. Diskin spoke with IBA's Eli Wogelenter about his experience while serving under the military command of Ariel Sharon during the 1973 Yom Kippur War.
Yes, it's possible. It's a story of my life, and I went through a lot of things, you know, and when you read a book, you see that sometimes you mean it's not possible, but then when you read it later, you see that it's possible. So.
What did you go through in life that seemed absolutely impossible, but in the end became reality?
For example, I was a full colonel in the Israeli army, and if I can bring an example from the Yom Kippur War, that I was in the 1st Brigade that passed the Suez Canal, and we were in the division of Arik Sharon. And when you see when Arik Sharon decided to go through the Suez Canal, of course, he was approved. People thought that that's it, we are going to die, and they wrote wills, and in the end it was possible.
You remember writing a will?
No, I don't believe in writing wills. I was in the reserve and I came to the war, and I believe in doing the job when it comes to fighting. So I didn't write any wills, but there were many officers and soldiers that wrote wills.
What about Ariel Sharon? People have certain conceptions about him. Tell me something about him that people don't know as a commander in a war. What made Ariel Sharon special?
Arik Sharon, first of all, people believed in him, and when they heard even his voice, they felt confidence, and he was very intuitive, and he was also a person with feelings and emotions. I remember when he was calling his wife, for example, and he had a loud voice, so everyone heard him saying, Lily, with these people we can do everything. So when people heard it, they felt good about it.
What surprised you about that war?
What surprised me is the beginning of the war, because the planning of the war was so bad. And I know that before, a few years before, when I was an officer, I was a commander of a company. So the plans were, with my company, that we had like 14 tanks to block Egyptian armored brigade, an infantry brigade. And I looked at my soldiers and I said, with the tanks, I said, can we really do it? No, but I was afraid to tell it to anyone, because people say, what, are you a coward? What, you cannot do it? So I didn't say anything, but that's what happened in the war, that the Egyptians, they learned how many tanks we have, how many soldiers, and then they brought 10 times more, and they succeeded crossing the Suez Canal, which was a surprise.
We're now able to bring you the comments from British Prime Minister David Cameron during the special Hanukkah celebrations in London this week.
I think of the Jewish community in Britain. I think of a community that has been unbelievably brilliant at integrating with our country and making an enormous contribution to it, while of course at the same time wanting to maintain important issues of religion and culture. You are in many ways the model of how to integrate successfully into a country. And the pledge I make as Prime Minister is those aspects of religion, such as Shekita, that matter a lot to your religion, are always safe while I am your Prime Minister. So let us be clear, there is no moral equivalence between an Israeli government that wants to defend its people and its territory against attack, and terrorists that want to kill as many people as they can with the weapons and the bombs and the missiles that they throw over Israel's borders. And this country will always be a staunch friend of Israel. Last week I had the huge honour, but considerable shock, of going myself to Auschwitz-Birkenau. And as I said in a speech yesterday, it doesn't matter how many books you've read or movies you've seen or documentaries you've watched, there's just nothing that prepares you for the sight of those rooms with the parents' luggage and the children's clothes and the hair and the prosthetic limbs and the cooking pots. And when you walk into what was a gas chamber with next door a set of ovens, it shocks you beyond words, and you don't process it straight away. You come back and you get on with other parts of your life and try to tell your family about what you've seen, but days later, I suspect weeks later, probably months later, you're still thinking about what you've seen and trying to understand how people in our world could do that. And when you see that, it only redoubles the dedication I have that we must make sure as a country we do everything we can to properly commemorate and educate for the future what happened in the Holocaust.
Very moving words. Turning now to the weather, and we can expect a cool start to the week with a slight drop in temperatures and isolated rain showers, mostly in the north. Here's the forecast at home and abroad for the next 24 hours. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. Laura Kornfield will be here tomorrow at this time to bring you the latest breaking news from Israel. I'm Erin Viner, wishing you a great week and shalom from Jerusalem.